Hey everyone, welcome to Lillian Live in New York City. We have another great episode tonight. I hope you like our new set. Tonight I have a very special guest, very good friend of mine, Steve Belcher. And Steve is going to tell us all about celiac disease and gluten-free. He was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. He was always healthy. And later in life, what seemed to be out of the blue for Steve was that he started to experience all kinds of symptoms. He wasn't sure what it was. He thought maybe it could have been, multiple sclerosis or any other type of disease, which he'll tell us about. Anyway, what happens is he started to experience the various symptoms that no doctor could diagnose until they did. Celiac disease symptoms often masquerade as other disease symptoms such as MS. Thankfully, Steve is gluten-free and healthy, often cooking up delicious meals that I even love. Today, Steve will educate us about what to be aware of and how you can best advocate for yourself about this tricky disease that is often missed and misdiagnosed. And here today, I'm going to welcome my good friend, Steve Belcher. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Lil.
How are you? How are you?
Gotta keep our distance.
I know. I'm sorry. I wish we could shake hands and everything. How you doing?
Great.
Yeah. Listen, this is the picture of health. Tell us, like, celiac disease. I mean, many people have never even heard of it. What exactly is it?
Yeah, it's interesting. But before I was diagnosed, I never heard of it either. I really didn't know what it was.
Uh-huh.
So celiac disease, it's a genetic disease. It's an autoimmune disorder that people that have it, it impacts their small intestines.
Uh-huh.
Won't get too technical. I'm not a doctor, but there's small little villi or hair-like features on your intestines that absorb all the nutrients.
Right.
And those with celiac disease, when gluten enters into the digestive tract, the body attacks those villi to the point where if it goes undiagnosed, undetected, in the most extreme cases, can wear those hairs down, those little hair villi down to the point where an individual is not absorbing the appropriate nutrients, and it gives a myriad of symptoms, over 200 symptoms, and that's where you get it from.
So how long were you, take us through, when you started to feel what you felt and then, what you went through to diagnose?
Sure. So like I said, celiac disease, and I've met a lot of people with celiac disease, those that have it kind of connect with each other, right? Because we all try to figure out how to deal. But it's never the same story. Every person you talk to, it manifested itself in a different way. For me, it started out with skin rashes. I would be itching and scratching for no reason. I would have tingling sensations, numbness. That's where the MS came in. Fatigue, just general fatigue. I get 8-9 hours of sleep a night, but I still feel like I was tired.
That's scary.
Right? And then bloating, irritability. I won't go into what that means, but I used to always be the recipient of irritability. Now I understood what it felt like to actually feel like it is to be, to not be myself.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things was brain fog, and this is where unexplainable short-term memory loss, where I forget the favorite restaurant that my wife and I would go to.
Yeah.
Forget coworkers' names, or forget a train of thought as I'm speaking and not be able to complete a sentence. And that was scary, but
that's scary because you could think you have a brain tumor.
Right. Fortunately for me, I started to have gastronomical symptoms in my GI. A lot of people with celiac go undiagnosed because they don't have symptoms in their GI tract. They have these other symptoms, and doctors have been trained that this is a child disease. It comes for children, and in fact, in reality, the average age of diagnosis is 45 years old, which was around the time that I was diagnosed. That's the average age. So you're genetically disposed to it. If you are, it could come at any point in time. It could come, in your 20s, in your 30s, in your 40s, and really haven't figured out what triggers it. But for me, I started to have these after all those other symptoms and couldn't figure out what it was, I went to a GI doctor.
Yeah.
And they initially didn't say, oh, well, that's of course celiac. You need to, you know, they kind of let me wait it out, and it started to get worse and worse and worse. And I said to get an extreme case, when the villi are down to I started losing weight. I mean, imagine myself, I was 20 pounds less than I am now. And I thought I had cancer.
Yeah.
I thought I had colon cancer or some other cancers.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I got a blood test, which can show the antibodies for celiac disease. But it's not conclusive until you actually get an endoscopy, where they actually go into your small intestine, take a sample, and test it. And that's why there's about, I think my research was that, 300 and something million Americans, there's about 3 million out of that 300 million that have celiac disease, but remarkably, there's probably about 2.5 million that are undiagnosed.
Wow.
That they're walking around with it, either misdiagnosed for the wrong disease, or they're undiagnosed because you have to go through this endoscopy and you have to go through the process.
Why do you think it's not on the doctor's radars?
Again, because it manifests itself to different people in different ways, from joint pain to arthritis to extreme migraines. It masquerades itself, as you said, as different things, so people don't. It's not like one thing. Most diseases, you can see it, and you know the symptoms, and you can tell the symptoms. And like I said, it's not something where you may think, oh, I need to go to a doctor. I was getting also like boils, like almost like canker sores.
Right.
And I just thought I had acne when I was a child. Maybe this is just acne. I mean, it's something I'm eating. It's just acne, right? So I didn't go to see a dermatologist. It happens like once, and it happened another time, and so it's those little things that if you know and understand all the different symptoms that could come about, then you can make sure you go to the doctor when you might say, oh, I just have headaches. That's normal. People get headaches, but people with celiac disease get headaches like multiple times more than people that don't. So it's one of those things where
it could be anything.
Yes.
So what about the people that you were fortunate enough to have, the symptoms in the gastro tract? So what about the people that don't?
See, that's the situation. It was a gentleman that I work with. He was very thin, very, very fit, and people just thought that, and he just thought, no, he had a good metabolism, right? He could eat what he wanted or whatever. But he had celiac disease, and the way he found out was in his blood test that he had shown iron deficiencies, almost to the point where he almost had like no iron in his blood. And the doctor's like, how are you even alive? You got like almost no iron.
Right.
He was having nosebleeds because he had iron deficiency in his blood. But he had no other symptoms, no other like symptoms that would show it. And then he got the test, and it was found that he had the disease, and then we haven't talked about, there is no cure, of course.
I was going to bring that up, yeah. Well, let me ask you something before we get onto the cure and what you do for it and how you mastered it so beautifully. So how long did it take from the beginning of when you had those first symptoms, the boils, or what happened, till the time that you finally got diagnosed?
It's hard to tell when things like that started, because but I would think it could have been 2 years now.
Wow.
Now, and again, I did a little bit more research too. When you have a disease, you look up, try to figure out everything, right? And some people go up to 6 years, even longer, without being diagnosed. So again, it's because it manifests itself different ways for different people, and so it's not one of those things where doctors are trained to automatically say, aha, it's this.
Right, but in your case, when you say you were diagnosed within 2 years, I know you had some severe reactions where, you felt like you were going to pass out, or a lot of major things. How do those other people go on 6 years without having,
I don't know. I mean,
how can they go?
I'll give you an example, because I had numbness. My mother has multiple sclerosis, and God bless her soul, she's 85 years old still.
Yeah.
And she's still around, but she had multiple sclerosis since she was 20, and I had the fear that I had multiple sclerosis because I was starting to get the same symptoms she always described, numbness and tingling in my extremities. And I went and got an MRI to see what it was, and they said, nothing. You have no you don't have MS, you don't have any neurologic. I was relieved, but then I was like, okay, what else is it? And a neurologist is not necessarily, is going to have to say, oh yeah, it's gluten. So again, that's where there's a lot of people that get misdiagnosed for different diseases like MS and other things, when it's really celiac.
Is celiac hereditary?
It is. So again, as I mentioned, about 1 in 100 Americans have it. But if you are related, direct related, like a sibling, or a father or a mother or child, your chances of getting it is 1 in 10. So it's 10 times more likely. So it is genetic, and that's why some people may think, I never heard of celiac disease. And when I was younger, I never heard of this. It's because it's genetically passed on from generation to generation, but it's not always manifesting itself.
Right.
Someone could have the genetic disposition for it and never get it their whole life.
Right.
But it then passes on. So it's become, the cases of celiac disease have increased significantly over the last 50 years because more and more procreation and you're getting more and more people genetically having this disposition to it, so you're seeing more cases. But 50 years ago, it was a lot less.
Right. So when the doctors finally diagnosed you and told you had celiac, what did you do next?
Well, I was relieved once I Googled it and figured out what it was, right? Because there is no cure for celiac disease. There's no medicine. There's no, which is from a cost perspective, that's good. There's no drug to take that's going to be expensive. The only cure for celiac disease is lifetime, not 1 year, 2 year, 10 years, lifetime gluten-free diet, right? And and it's not gluten-free, casual gluten-free. It's
all the time.
No, it's every meal, every snack, but also hidden sources of gluten, and that was But as soon as I realized I had celiac and I went gluten-free, 100% gluten-free, I started to see immediate symptoms relief.
Right.
Like the fatigue, the brain fog, the tingling,
wow.
the rashes, everything slowly started to go away. Now this was about 5 years ago when I was diagnosed. So it took probably 2 or 3 years just to get my villi and my intestines to actually grow back, and that's not always the case for everybody, but for me, fortunate. I totally have no issues with absorbing nutrients. Now I do occasionally, if gluten sneaks into my food, get the symptoms that I talked about, right? Because it's funny because it's cross contamination. That's the biggest thing. I don't purposely eat a donut or purposely eat a piece of pizza. But sometimes there could be a spice that I use when I cook that could have some hidden gluten in it, or a sauce, or if I go out to eat. So, that's where, the celiac community is not, and I'll make my little pitch here. We go out to restaurants and we tell our waiters and waitresses that we're gluten free, that they have to realize that this is, if I have gluten, it's going to damage my intestines, and
some of them may not realize.
Even if it's cross-contamination, then that's why it's very important, because even a speck or a crumb, so I have to keep a clean area in the house. I keep all my food in one cabinet. I cook all my food. I meal prep, which actually is a blessing in disguise because it forces me to be healthy. I have to prepare all my foods, so I eat meats, vegetables, and
ladies and gentlemen, this is a man that works 12-hour days, food shops for himself, cooks for himself. Unbelievable. And the food is really good. It got me into asparagus. Never liked it before. That's just incredible. So you're telling me that if you have just one little speck, it could bother you.
And Rose, my wife, could tell you, I've come downstairs one morning and I'm irritable, right? It's like, I'm edgy, and I answer a question sharply. It's like, that's not Steve. That's not you. Did you have gluten? Did you get some gluten? And something be like that, or I'm just. So those symptoms that I talked about could come back.
Right.
When but then they go away. But before undiagnosed, and this is where it's important, undiagnosed, some people may look at a gluten-free diet and say, I want to try that, and they actually feel better, right? They feel like less headaches, less joint pain, less GI issues, and they could have this disease and they just don't even know it, right?
Wow.
And the fear there is, the issue there is that those people that feel better eating gluten but are not properly diagnosed, they could be ingesting gluten inadvertently, these small traces.
Yeah.
And it could be causing damage. And what does that mean? And what's the implication? If someone with celiac does not maintain a strict gluten-free diet, then you're at higher risk for other autoimmune diseases.
Oh.
Like you could get I talked about type 1 diabetes,
right,
and
right,
osteoporosis and thyroid, all
it
kinds
could lead
of issues,
to all kinds
colon cancer, bowel and intestinal cancers. It's all of those. You're more prone if you're undiagnosed, and the problem with this is that most people that start eating gluten and feel better, in order to be tested, like to go get a blood test,
yeah,
you can't just go get a blood test if you're gluten free. You have to be eating gluten.
Oh, because
otherwise
it'll
the
be
blood
missed.
test will give you a false.
Yeah, it'll be missed.
False. Yeah. So a lot of people don't want to go through and get the blood test because then you have to start eating gluten and they'll feel bad. They'll feel worse again. So they just so my suggestion again, if I could go back, would if if you have some symptoms that your doctor can't figure out, or try going gluten free and see if you feel better. And then maybe ask to see if you can get the test. It's a simple blood test. You can ask your doctor.
Is it called a celiac?
It's a celiac test, right?
Blood test.
And it tests for antibodies. So it tests to see whether your body is reacting to gluten in a way that is indicative of a celiac disease patient. Again, once you have that marker, they still need to do an endoscopy, which is which some people may not like, but they stick a scope down.
But aren't you out when they do it?
Yeah, you're out.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's how they really validate it and verify it. And then if you know, then you can be more prepared. Your siblings, your children, your parents, however, should need to know. Right?
And so do you have to follow up with your doctors every so often, or how does that work?
So since my diagnosis, I see my GI doctor once a year. So again, they do a blood test, and I'm at the age anyway where I'm getting a colonoscopy every 5 years. So I do an endoscopy at the same time I do the colonoscopy every 5 years. I've had my second one now, 5 years in. So they again check to see that I'm still, like, villi are still fine, and there's no indication. So you're under care after that.
And do you, regarding the gluten-free products, do you have your lifestyle now, the way you eat? Do you feel like, I mean, it seems to me you're doing a great job of handling it. Do you feel like, oh, I'm good with this? And in the beginning, were you? I mean, probably in the beginning you really wanted to feel better, so you were going to do anything. But do you feel like there's a lot of gluten-free, there's a lot of options, and like you've been able to really master it?
Yeah, no, it's a good thing you mentioned it, because I had already, prior to being diagnosed, I had already started on a lifestyle, if you will, that was cutting out things like pasta, cutting out things, or reducing gluten just because because gluten is often associated with carbohydrates, right? Think of donuts and pizza and pasta, right? Bread. So I was already kind of cutting those out of my diet just to be a little healthier from weight and so forth. So when I was diagnosed, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I can never eat another piece of bread or a piece of pizza or a donut ever again. At least the kind that. It wasn't for me as much of a psychological, but for many people it is, right? People that if someone told you could never have, and I've come from Chicago, deep dish pizza. That's one of the things that I've tried. There's a gluten-free deep dish pizza out there. It's just not the same, but that's one thing where they have gluten-free beer that tastes great. They have gluten-free bread that's not too bad, but that deep dish pizza, there's no
There's
substitute. So that's one thing I
tough.
missed.
That's tough. Yeah.
But when you think about it, you know, being forced to eat gluten free, actually, doesn't mean it's a low carb diet, because a lot of things a lot of high carb foods have gluten.
Right.
Or have no gluten in it. Rice has no gluten. Potatoes have no gluten. Right. So it doesn't mean that a gluten free diet is a no carb diet.
Right.
It's just not. It's choosing foods that are more natural.
Mm-hmm.
So again, in the supermarket, walking around the outside and not in the inside. There's more things gluten-free walking around the outside, the vegetables, fruits, meats, than walking in the inside when everything comes in a box with 14,000 ingredients on it. My rule is if there's more than like 4 or 5 ingredients on a box or something, forget it, because I don't know what's in there.
Really?
And also look for gluten-free, but it's just,
Is there something that beside that deep dish pizza, is there something that you miss that you can't get with gluten free?
Every year when I turn another year older and I have to have a birthday cake, there's certain like an angel food cake or something that's like soft and fluffy.
Yeah. Can't
or
have
a strawberry shortcake.
They don't make it
well, they
gluten-free?
do, but it doesn't taste.
It doesn't taste the same. I wonder if they're ever going to work on that. Also, I want to ask you, I know, we went out to dinner the other night for Rose's birthday, and, I've been with friends who have allergies, and I met someone once who carried a card with a skull on it, and on the back it had all the things she was allergic to, and every time she would go out to eat, she would give it to the waiter. Sometimes you can tell the waiter or the waitress, oh, I'm gluten free, but they might not, as we mentioned before, they might not take it as serious, like this is a matter of kind of life and death in a way. How do you assure that you're gonna, get the right, that it's being taken seriously, and that you're gonna be safe?
So the general rule I found out is when I go into it, if I go to a diner, I don't even bother, because the diner is like there's gluten all over the place. They're making pancakes in the morning. They're making, so it's not even worth even asking whether they can make something. Can you cook that in a way that's off to the side and say I don't even bother.
Right.
All right, and I have that discussion so the nicer, all else equal, the nicer the restaurant, the more. Right, the better chance that it's going to be safe, that they're taking care of it, right?
Right.
But I get a sense when I talk to the waiter or the waitress immediately, right? If I mention celiac disease, if they look at me like, then I'm like, okay, I'm not going to order anything, because they don't even know what it is. If I have to explain it to them, but a lot of times, and most of the time, they do know what it is, and they do. They should. We have patients, we have people that do come in all the time. We know what to do. Don't worry. They give you that assurance. Then you feel better, right? But most restaurants are not equipped. They can't. It's expensive to have a whole portion of your kitchen kind of walled off, a separate counter space, separate oven space, separate pan space, and grill space, because that's what it really needed. That's what you really need. A lot of restaurants don't. It's expensive to do that, right? So it really depends on how well they take care of and really cater towards the customer and folks with serious conditions.
Do you think that celiac is on the rise? Are there a lot more new cases every year?
Yeah, as I was saying, because it's genetic. It's genetic, and it just
keeps multiplying.
So I will mention too, there is a test you can get. I was mentioning the antibody blood test. Yeah. There's also a test, and I'm not 100% sure if insurance pays for this, so don't go out and get it and say, Steve Belcher said I can get it. But there's a genetic test that'll actually test to see if you have the gene. And if you have the gene, then...
What is the gene?
The gene is the marker. So that.
I know, what is it called?
I don't know what it's called. Oh, okay. But if you have the gene, I should know what it's called, but you have the gene, then that doesn't mean you have it. That just means that whatever age you are, you could still get it. Like I got it when I was 48. Mm-hmm. You could get it when you're 28. You can get it when you're 68, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't have the gene, then you'll never get it. So it'll tell you whether you'll never get it, but it won't tell you
when,
if you're gonna get it.
Right,
so,
right.
But I would just say they haven't figured out what triggers it, right? So if let's say you have the gene, but you don't have it, you're in your 20s or 30s, they're saying it could be the stress that triggers it, extreme stress. It could be physical injury, surgery, even for women of pregnancy. It could be something like that, but they haven't really figured out.
Yeah.
What
I understand.
What causes it?
Yeah.
What causes it to go from having the gene to actually having it? So,
wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, you know what I think, Steve? I think that what we should do is, after we finish this recording, that you should speak with your gastro doctor and have this as an educational video, because you really took something that was, negative into something really positive. And, I've been around you long enough to see how well you do with your shopping and your cooking, and the food is delicious that you make, and how you handle it so beautifully. And I think that this should be used in the doctor's offices, and we should work on that. What do you think of that?
No, I like that, because again, people with this disease, you could think about it and get depressed, right? I can think about it and say, because I travel a lot. I used to travel more for work.
Right.
And it's not, I just can't, or even just driving down the highway, pulling into a rest stop, I just can't eat whatever's at the
Right.
So I have to bring I just have to prepare more. But what it does is it makes me healthier. I feel better. I feel stronger because I don't eat fast food, because I have to bring my own food when I go away. So again, it's and once you're to that point where you're feeling healthier, it kind of like, what would you rather be? Rather be happier because you were able to eat that donut or that French fries at McDonald's, or for the minute, or more happier that you're actually have a disease, but not letting it cause you to take over, and I can live a long, healthy, or even healthier life than someone without.
You have such a great attitude, and you're inspiring, and you're educating everybody, because again, it's not something that everybody knows about. And I actually want to ask one more question that I thought about. I have another friend who has celiac, and once in a while she'll cheat, and she'll have, let's say she'll have something like a pizza, a regular type of pizza. She can weather it. Is it something that you can do, or like you said before, you might have some symptoms like you get irritable, and it's just not
I don't think it's even about those symptoms. It's about you doing that is hurting yourself. You're damaging your intestines by doing that, and increasing the risk of getting other autoimmune diseases. So I wouldn't even fathom that.
Right.
But
you do it once, you could do it again, right? And then it becomes a habit.
And that's the really, I'm glad you brought that up, because some people don't have the symptoms like that.
Right.
They maybe were diagnosed because they had a certain symptom, but when they ingest gluten, they don't have like diarrhea and gas and bloating and all these other things associated with, even with the damage to your intestines.
Yeah.
They don't have those other. So they may, I'm just going to slip one of these. I'm just going to.
Because
I don't get those pains in my stomach like other people.
Doesn't matter.
That is. I wouldn't tell your life insurance agent you do that.
Yeah. That's a good point, actually. That's a really good point. Yeah, because just because you don't feel the symptoms doesn't mean you're not doing damage to yourself. Right. So everybody, listen to Steve, because he knows what he's doing.
I want to make one other comment.
Sure, go right ahead.
Is that I've been talking about celiac disease, but I also want to mention that there is also another, 2 or 3 million people in America that don't have celiac disease, but have gluten sensitivity. Meaning that they feel better and not eating gluten, but they don't have the damage, but they just feel better. So the whole rise of this gluten-free, foods in the supermarket and is also, symptomatic of the fact that not just the celiac disease patients, but also there's gluten sensitivity, which is a close cousin to celiac, that people feel better, not
Yeah.
eat gluten. So I'm not advocating if you're healthy and you're fine and you don't, gluten is not, foods with gluten in it are healthy. Wheat bread is healthy. There's a lot of foods that have gluten that are healthy. So this is not a message to go out and be gluten-free.
Right.
But if you have symptoms that may indicate that you either have gluten sensitivity or celiac disease, try cutting gluten out of your diet and see how you feel. And if you feel better, see your doctor, see a nutritionist, and maybe you can improve.
Do you think, you mean like maybe like feel better within a day or two?
Well, it could take a little longer. So don't think that I went a day without eating gluten and nothing happened.
Right.
So, but yeah, it's going to be a little bit longer. So an easy thing is if you feel fatigued, right? If you feel, tired, or even if you feel bloated, or certain things where it's like, I'm not going to go see a doctor because I'm tired, but let me just try it.
Right.
And see. It may not be celiac disease, could just be gluten sensitivity, but anyway.
No, that's a great point. I mean, it was so great to have you, and I think that honestly, I'm not kidding when I say that we should, take this video and bring it to your doctors, because it's really educational. Even have it in the waiting room. I'm not kidding.
Well, I appreciate your having me on your
I know, it's great to have you. Thank you so much, Steve. You're awesome. And, if he can do it, we can all do it. And thank you, everyone. And we will see you next week on Wednesday with live with Lillian in New York City. And have a great night. Take care.